How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from Weather Sponge 5000, and in this video we're going to focus on multiple tropical waves that are moving through the Atlantic at this time and determine if one of them has a possibility of developing into a tropical storm and potentially impacting the Caribbean and the United States in the more long-term future. But before I begin, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather-related content. So let's begin by taking a look at the current water vapor imagery for the entirety of the Northern Atlantic, and we're taking a look at two disturbances right now currently moving through the main development region. We have this one disturbance which now has been given a possibility by the National Hurricane Center of developing within the next 5 days. However, beyond the 5-day mark, we could see this strengthen a little bit more than what the National Hurricane Center is suggesting. How much this storm would strengthen over the next 5 days. So we could see this potentially become Tropical Storm Fiona, and unfortunately it's expected to move very close to the Caribbean islands. So even if this doesn't develop, there's still a higher possibility for heavier rainfall to occur by the late this week and into early next week. So it's certainly something to be aware of around the Caribbean islands and potentially the United States in the more long-term future. And we're also taking a look at this tropical disturbance, which does have a possibility of developing, and future tropical waves that aren't really shown in the water vapor imagery but have a possibility of developing in the more long-term future. Now, taking a look at the 5-day graphical tropical weather outlook, of course right now we have a low chance that these two disturbances will develop. However, like I said, we could see that chance rise if the National Hurricane Center does detect that conditions will become more favorable as this heads closer to the United States. And there's certainly a possibility given the indications we've been seeing with some of the computer models, such as the European model, where the European model does want to strengthen this a little bit as this heads closer to the United States, which is definitely something we're going to need to be aware of over the next several days to see if this does have a shot of potentially re-intensifying as this heads further eastward beyond the 5-day mark. And we do see that Puerto Rico and the rest of the Caribbean islands are pretty much in the cone of uncertainty. So even if this doesn't develop, you still should expect heavier rainfall associated with this tropical wave as it moves through. So flash flooding is certainly a possibility. And we have this other disturbance which has a low 20% chance of developing. And the good news is with this disturbance, it's most likely to go out to sea, but still at least something to pay close attention to, because you never know, the forecast could change where this moves more westerly rather than northerly. So we're just gonna need to pay very close attention to these two tropical disturbances. Now, taking a look at what the European model is stating at this time. So taking a look at how the conditions are right now for the entirety of the Atlantic, we have this big ridge located in the middle of the Atlantic. However, one thing that's for certain is that it's gonna these two tropical disturbances are gonna deal with a great amount of dry air as this continues to head further westward, and that should be enough to inhibit these two tropical disturbances from developing into a tropical storm, which is still the most likely scenario at this time. There is maybe that slight possibility that the moisture that this storm would be able to enhance its convection enough to where it could shield away this dry air for Tropical Storm Fiona to form, but at this point it seems less likely, as it seems like the dry air is just going to be too much for this storm to handle, which will certainly make the air more stable surrounding the center of circulation for less convection to occur. So as all, Tropical Storm Fiona forming within the next 5 days is still on the lower end, but still at least good to pay attention to the possibility that maybe the convection could be a little bit more enhanced than initially anticipated, which is certainly not out of the realm of possibilities given the margin of error we do have with the computer models, even when forecasting something as close as 5 days out. Now, so if I were to continue to move forward, we do see that the European model wants to fizzle these two disturbances out and move this tropical wave further northward. However, another thing I want to point out is that we do have another tropical wave coming right behind this tropical wave, and so we're going to need to pay close attention to that this tropical wave as well, because again, maybe it could enter conditions that are a little bit more favorable for this to develop. At this point, the European model also isn't very confident with this tropical wave, but there's still a lot of time to iron out the forecast with this tropical wave coming behind this one. However, for the tropical wave that would impact the Caribbean when it comes to rainfall, we do see that it'll move towards the Caribbean islands by the weekend, by around Saturday to Sunday. That's when you should expect an enhanced amount of rainfall and the possibility of flash flooding. So you need to pay close attention to that if you're around the Caribbean islands. And if I were to continue to move forward, we do see the European model wants to re-strengthen this as this approaches the Bahamas, and it's not very far from the coast of Florida, which is definitely something we're going to need to pay close attention to. And we do see that once it enters the Caribbean or just to the east of Florida, we do see that the dry air quickly subsides, as there isn't a lot of dry air that would inhibit this low pressure system like it would when it was in the main developed region. So there is certainly that possibility we could see this storm re-strengthen a little bit as this moves further westward. So it's definitely something to keep in mind. And taking a look at the upper level winds over the next several days as this storm continues to head further westward. So if I were to continue to move forward, you see that there is going to be a slight amount of wind shear, but not a lot. Actually, let me go to the 200 millibar wind shear forecast, and we do see there isn't a lot of wind shear at this time. We do have a little bit of an upper level high located right over this low pressure system, but for the most part, the wind shear is light, and since the upper level high is directly over low pressure system, not only will that weaken the upper level winds over the center circulation, since the upper level winds are diverting away from the low pressure system, but it will also create a high level of divergence aloft in the atmosphere for a higher rate of convection to occur if the other conditions were suitable for that to occur, which at this point seems like there's a little bit too much dry air for that to happen early on, at least. However, we do see that as the storm heads further westward, we do see that while there is some wind shear, again, this upper level high will be directly over it, and the wind shear isn't enough to disorganize this area of moisture as this approaches Florida. So again, taking a look at the forecast hour, there's still a high amount of uncertainty. We need to iron out how much moisture there will be and if the wind shear will be light enough, which is still highly uncertain at this time as we approach the later month of September. That's typically when the upper level winds should begin to increase especially as this approaches the United States, of course, because the winter months are coming and we do see an enhanced amount of instability throughout the northern portion of the Atlantic. But it seems like the European model wants to redevelop this as this approaches Florida. Now, taking a look at the GFS model, the GFS model isn't as confident with that happening, but if I were to continue to move forward, we do see that right around that this area of vorticity could still enter the Caribbean, but a lot further southward than what the European model is forecasting, and it does develop at least some sort of tropical storm right around Cuba, again in the very long-term future. So while this tropical disturbance might not have a great chance of developing within the near future, there is a possibility that once it centers close to the Gulf of Mexico, we could see conditions become more favorable for this to redevelop into, or potentially intensify for the first time into, a tropical storm. But again, we're just going to need to wait and see how the conditions will play out. Again, the GFS model does expect a high amount of dry air to inhibit this storm as it heads further westward. But again, the air should become more moist by the time this reaches the Caribbean. So I do think that there is a higher possibility we could see at least some sort of vorticity, whether it's directly involved with this disturbance or another tropical wave that's just to the south of it. There will be a higher level of vorticity somewhere in the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico for potentially a tropical cyclone to form by next week. So it's definitely something to be aware of over the next several days. And in terms of tropical disturbances behind it, again, it seems like there's too much dry air for these tropical waves to handle. There will be multiple tropical waves coming off the African coast, so we're just going to have to wait and see how conditions will play out. But the later we go into September, the less likely it is we will see tropical cyclones develop in the main developed region and more likely develop somewhere in the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico as we approach the October timeframe. So that's something to keep in mind. But I'll keep you guys updated regarding the chance this does re-intensify as it approaches the Caribbean or the United States. So definitely something to be aware of over the next several days. Now, taking a look at what the ensemble members are saying with the GFS model for over the next 240 hours, so approximately 10 days. What's interesting is that with this tropical disturbance, we do see some ensemble members wanting to strengthen this, not only the tropical storm status, but we even see some ensemble members wanting to strengthen this to hurricane status and do take it up northward. So it's definitely at least something to be aware of beyond the 5-day mark, because this tropical disturbance could enter an area where conditions will become more favorable for tropical cyclone development. And we do see this next tropical disturbance, some ensemble members wanting to develop this into a tropical storm. So it's definitely something to be aware of as well. Now, taking a look at my overall forecast when it comes to a potential tropical storm Fiona. So the National Hurricane Center is giving this tropical wave around a low chance of developing within the next 5 days. However, I did list the possibility of Fiona right around the Caribbean, because there is a possibility that the same tropical disturbance could re-intensify close to the United States. So we're going to need to wait and see how the conditions will play out. And then Tropical Storm Fiona is also possible behind this tropical disturbance. So the good news is that it's likely to move out to sea. So it's, so that's certainly good news, but we're just going to need to pay close attention to this forecast when it comes to this tropical disturbance over the next several days. And I'll keep you guys updated when the certainty does rise for this tropical disturbance. But anyways, guys, I thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more about the cause, and I hope you guys have a great day.